like to call the meeting in order. If you would stand for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, welcome everyone that's here tonight, and welcome everyone who's watching from home. Madam Clerk, call the roll, please.
Trustee DeVore?
Present.
Trustee Gett?
Present.
Trustee Kazam?
Present.
Trustee Goff?
Present.
Trustee Wigginton?
Present.
Trustee Weisenberg?
Present.
Okay, we have a quorum. Tonight, we are here to hear a presentation. The Village Board voted to spend a considerable amount of money on hiring a consultant who are experts in the area of water to come in and to evaluate our system. Wayne Aldridge, our Director of Community Development, is the village's point person on this. So Wayne, if you'd take it away.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, we were charged to really look at the water system, in this case, in the Peoria Heights water system. So typically, when municipalities look at these things, whether it's water, sewer, transportation systems are a little bit different, but in particular, underground infrastructure, these types of systems, you undergo a capital improvement program and take a really hard look at the system underground. So a lot of times these systems are forgotten systems when you think about water and sewer. We just turn our tap on and expect to see water. So in this case, we looked at these systems very closely. There's two components to a water capital system improvement program, and one is the engineering part. So you look at do an assessment of the complete system, and then you look at what improvements need to be done to the system. And then the other part is how you're going to fund improvements to the system. So in this case, we went through both parts for the Peoria Heights water system. To start a plan like this, you're also looking for professional help. So in the case of Peoria Heights, you may recall we issued a request for proposals from qualified engineering firms that typically do this type of work. We had several qualified applicants. We ultimately selected the folks from Woodard & Kern. Woodard & Kern is special in this industry because they really specialize in water systems. So that's what put them head above some of the other consultants because of their expertise in this area. So with that, tonight we want to do a presentation of the water capital program, and you should have received this, and this is on our website as well. It's the Water System Capital Improvement Plan Report. So folks, the public, folks in the audience could access that on our website and review that. But tonight we have Don Tall, the project manager from Woodard Kern, and Zach Malik.
Yeah, got it.
Is the project engineer. So they're here to do a presentation and cover the water system capital improvement program. After that, Mayor, we can take questions from the board, and comment from the audience and see if we can answer any questions you may have. But I'll just turn it over at this point to Don.
Thank you, Wayne. First of all, thank you very much for selecting us. It's been a pleasure working with you. Again, my name is Don Tall, project manager with Woodard & Kern. I'm going to take you through just a basic background of how we got here. So after we were selected, Zach and I came up. We met with Chris, we met with Wayne, and we kind of toured the area. We looked at all of the infrastructure. We went down to the treatment site, the wells, the towers, kind of drove around town and discussed some of the issues in the village, and just kind of got a good overall view of what was going on and kind of our tasks at hand. And after we went back to the office, we put together, or Zach put together, a data request to the village. And that was just to kind of really understand the documentation behind all of it. So we asked for a lot of the existing plans, any known data of the system. So any water reports, IEPA reports, any known issues with the system with breakage, low flow, chlorine issues, issues down at the wells. If I understand there's some manganese issues. So we just kind of asked for anything that we could get on the system so we could do a really deep dive in the evaluation. And along with all that, we also asked for the financial side of it, because a part of this capital improvement plan is not only identifying the projects that you need to do over the next 5 to 20 years, it's also how you're going to pay for it. And what we really need to do is look at the financial side of it to see where the village is right now with the money that they're getting in revenues, and then where they need to be to do the capital improvement plans. So we wanted to identify that gap so we can identify what funding sources and how much funding we're going to need to actually implement all these capital improvement plans. So we, got a little list there of the data requests. It was ordinances, financial reports, binding agreements, debt services, the rates, all of the budgets, the maintenance reports, GIS data, which GIS is the computer layout of the system. And then, like I said, the water main breaks and inspection reports and all of that. And then, once we gathered all that information, then good old Zach here, he compiled all the information. We started to lay out the plan of it, of what is the immediate actions that need to be taken in like the next 5 years versus a longer stretch over the next 20 years. So we had several workshops with Wayne and Chris to kind of not only identify and make sure we're capturing all of the projects that the village needs, but also ranking them in order of which ones are the most important. And part of that is looking at the financial side too, is what can you afford, in what order. So we kind of went through the 5-year, the 20-year, and then did the rankings. And then once we had the rankings, we went through each project and did a really good look at what would it cost to implement those projects. So we got a good estimate of the project cost, and then kind of a preliminary scope of what that project is. So we kind of list out A to Z what it would take to implement that project. And then after we got the capital improvement plan, kind of laid out where we wanted, then it was time to move on to the financial side and start looking at the deep dive of what it's going to take to actually fund these projects. So that's when we pulled in the village again to look at their funding side and our funding side. Unfortunately, Ethan, who did our funding work, could not be here tonight, so we'll cover kind of what he did, and Zach will talk a little bit more about the rate analysis later. So once we got all that kind of laid out, then we kind of finalized the report and submitted it to the village. So with that, I'll kind of hand it over to Zach and kind of talk through the steps of the CIP and how we came about what's in their report.
Thank you, Don. So, as Don mentioned, it first started off with a evaluation of the existing infrastructure conditions in the village. So some of the high points for this, we'll start off with the groundwater wells. The village currently has 5 active wells. Well number 7 is the village's highest producing well, since it has a 200 horsepower motor compared to the 60 horsepower motor at the other well sites. And this well is currently in good working condition. For well number 8, based on recent pumping records, its capacity has decreased over time. However, it is one of the village's lowest producers of manganese, and it, along with well number 11, are used to blend water for some of the higher manganese producing wells. Well number 9 was recently rehabilitated around 2018 and is currently in good working condition. However, this is the village's second largest contributor of manganese and must be ran with another well to blend water. Well number 11 was rehabilitated in 2019 to unclog the well screen and is one of the village's lowest producers of manganese as well. So either it or well number 8 are ran for blending. Well number 12 is the village's newest water well. It was installed in 2011. However, it is the village's largest producer of manganese and has led to IPA violations in late 2021 and early 2022. The water treatment plant at the village contains high service pumps. The village has 3 high service pumps. Each of these are 250 horsepower, and they were originally installed in late 1970. Due to their age and condition, these were completely rebuilt in 2015 and are now in good working condition. The village only needs to run one of these pumps at a time, while pump number 2 and pump number 3 are on standby and backup. Additionally, at the water treatment plant, there is chemical storage facilities as well as feed equipment, and both of these appear to be in good working condition. The village's distribution system contains 3 water storage tanks. First is a 1 million gallon standpipe at the water treatment plant. This was last inspected in 2016 and was recently repainted in 2017. Due to its proximity to a forest reserve, there is a buildup of dirt and grime on the exterior, and power washing is recommended. Additionally, the interior coating of this tank is beginning to thin, and it is recommended that this continue to be monitored. The Toledo elevated storage tank was also repainted in 2017, and both the interior and exterior coatings of this tank are beginning to thin, and it's recommended that this is monitored as well. The observation tower was also repainted in 2017. When the rehab occurred in 2017, the stairs in the maintenance area were not addressed, and there are some structural concerns on these. Additionally, the elevator mechanical room has not been rehabilitated in recent years, and it is recommended that further evaluation is done on both of these components. The water distribution system contains water mains, and these experience frequent breaks due to the system age. Based on GIS information, some of these water mains are as old as 1914. The village also has difficulty isolating areas of the breaks due to the lack of valves within the system. Also, some areas of the village have low pressure due to the varying grade throughout the village. The water meters have been replaced recently in 2013 and are in good working condition. Lastly, the village has identified some lead service lines, and based on updates to the lead and copper rule, these lead service lines must be replaced. So with the existing conditions evaluated, we were able, along with the village, to analyze some of the high priority areas and develop the capital improvement plans. So this is an overview of the 5-year capital improvement plan. The beginning years of this CIP include preliminary evaluations and engineering design, which will then lay the groundwork for construction in future years. Some of the high priority projects include the water treatment upgrades. This is priority number 1 with the village, since this is a regulatory compliance issue. The main focus of this project will be manganese treatment, but we will also take time in this project to evaluate some emerging contaminants that the EPA is currently monitoring. Additionally, another high priority project in this CIP is the lead service line inventory and replacement. This is also a regulatory compliance issue based on updates to the lead and copper rule. In fiscal year 2024, there will be the inventory of the lead service lines, which will identify areas that replacement will need to occur, and then replacement of those lead service lines will occur in following years. Lastly, water main replacements are also important for the village. These water main replacements are targeted in areas where there are frequent water main breaks, as well as roadway reconstruction projects. The best time to replace these water mains is when the roadway is ripped up during construction, so we can go in and replace the utilities underneath, and then the new roadway is paved on top. This is an overview of the 20-year CIP. Some of these projects are a continuation of projects from the 5-year CIP, such as ongoing work to replace the lead lines throughout the village. Additionally, a lot of these projects are systematic replacements. So for example, the high service pumps at the water treatment plant, as previously stated, these were replaced in 2015, and pumps typically have a useful life of about 15 years. So therefore, in fiscal year 2031, you should plan to replace those pumps. This is intended to be a living dynamic document that should be evaluated on an annual basis. based on new priorities and any completed projects from the previous year. So with the capital improvement plan developed, we were able to analyze the water rates for the village. This started off by analyzing the existing conditions, including historical water consumption data, operating expenses, and existing debt service obligations. Once these were analyzed, the capital improvement projects were added to the analysis and forecasted cash flow effects were analyzed. After this, we were able to align capital needs with the customer's ability to pay via the user rates. And lastly, we charted a path forward for sustainable long-term growth in fiscal future. This slide here shows a no change alternative showing the status of the village if no rate increases were implemented. As you can see, even with no CIP spending, rates would still need to increase at about 3% per year to avoid deficit spending. If all CIPs were implemented, there would be significant deficit spending with no rate increases. The reserves balance will be depleted by 2029 and continue to go into a deficit for future years. This chart here shows the total capital cost of the project to be completed annually versus the actual amount needed to fund these projects by using financial products such as loans. The blue line on top shows the annual deficit capital need, while the bar chart on the bottom shows the annual actual spending by the village. This is similar to purchasing a vehicle. Instead of paying the upfront cost in year one for the vehicle itself is paid off over multiple years. It's similar for these capital improvement projects where the loan terms are 20 to 30 years. The table at the top shows proposed rates for the village. The proposed rates increase start at 10% for the first 2 years, and then vary between 7 to 9% for future years. The proposed rates will fund the recommended CIP projects while also maintaining healthy reserves. In the graph at the bottom, you can see the reserves balance goal, the light blue line, and the annual surplus deficit spending by the dark blue line. The CIP projects can still be funded while maintaining a healthy reserves balance. Taking the previous case a step forward, assuming the water treatment upgrades project, lead service line inventory replacement, water main replacements, and the water wells header replacement projects are funded by SRF funding, the reserves balance are able to be increased slightly more. SRF funding is stands for the State Revolving Fund, which is an IPA mechanism to fund capital improvement projects. You can see that the annual surplus would decrease a bit from the prior example, and reserve funds would not be quite as high. This is due to the fact that SRF funding is typically on a 20-year loan period as opposed to a 30-year loan period. This chart visualizes the table above for annual quarterly residential bill increases year over year for 3 different uses profiles. The lines refer to the dollar amount, while the labels show the year-over-year % increase in bill price. Additionally, to compare how these rates will stack up to neighboring communities, we show where these rates are in comparison to Peoria's current rates. You can see that even rates for low users in the village will be lower in fiscal year 2028 than Peoria's current rates are today. Likewise, the village's bill for mid-range users will also be lower in fiscal year 2028 than Peoria. Finally, customers with higher usage, the village's bill will still be smaller in fiscal year 2030 than Peoria's current rates are today. These graphs here help depict the historical trends in average quarterly bills between the village of Peoria Heights and neighboring communities of both Peoria and Champaign. One can see historically the village's quarterly bills are much lower than the other communities. While it is impossible to know how much Peoria and Champaign will increase their rates in coming years, If one assumes they increase rates at a similar rate as the past, Peoria and Champaign's bill will still be higher than the Village of Peoria's with the recommended rate increases presented today. While the gap between the Village's bill and Peoria's bill narrows, it is important to recognize these increased bills are directly supporting tens of millions in needs of capital improvements, improving both the quality and dependability of the service. This table here shows how the rates compare to other neighboring communities. Even though these surrounding rates reflect current costs today, they will likely also raise rates as well as the village. Peoria's rates for the low-use customer are higher today than what we project the village's rates will be in 2028. The village's rates for low users will be a few dollars higher in 2029 than what Peoria's rates are today. Additionally, the village's current rates are slightly higher, but still in line with Normal's rates. So the village's rates will be higher over the next 10 years. It's safe to assume Normal will also be increasing their rates. We don't know what other communities will be doing with their rates, but it's safe to say that they are running into similar issues as the village. Where the village may be having a manganese concern, other villages or other cities and communities will be having similar issues. So with all that, I'd be happy to open it up to any questions.
I have a question. What, if any, unforeseen costs could be expected if we were to embark on these capital improvement projects? Do you come across situations like that, like in all construction?
No large surprises, and that's the benefit of, having a healthy reserves balance. In case any surprises do pop up, you have that reserves balance to dip into to help fund any, surprises that may pop up.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering what, on the filtration side, the grand plan has. I mean, I have experience with the system improvements of water before, and due to the fact that we're starting to pull mineral deposits out of the ground with the water, what's your grand scheme of plan for removing that? Reverse osmosis, some sort of filtering system?
A common treatment for...
If I may interject, that's a good question. This meeting's being taped to show to the rest of the community. If you wouldn't mind repeating some of the questions, just so everyone watching at home.
Yeah. Yep.
And then if you drill down a little deeper on lead and manganese too, and one of the things Mr. Aldridge and I mentioned that you had expertise, your firm does. At some point, if you'd explain to all of us what communities you've worked with and why we should trust you and all these recommendations. So please go ahead and answer that gentleman's question though first.
Yep, so if I understood your question correctly, it's what treatment alternative there is for manganese removal, is that correct?
Manganese or any other mineral deposits, because we're getting to that point where the wells are starting to suck natural deposits of material out of the ground, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yes, a common treatment alternative for that is filtration. So one alternative being green sand filtration is typically targeted specifically for manganese. There's other types of filtration that can help with various mineral deposits. And then,
would you please explain to people who may not know the risk with manganese, what manganese is, how it occurs, and what a high-level risk poses?
Yep, so manganese is a natural mineral that contributes to water hardness. The limit for manganese is about 150 micrograms per liter, if I remember correctly. And in very high concentrations, it could cause some issues with some health issues, and what those are specifically, I do not know. But it is important to maintain a level below the 150 micrograms per liter. And then I think you mentioned something about lead service lines and the replacement for that.
If you would explain the public health risk with high levels of lead and why that's a issue, and let that gentleman ask a follow-up if you would, please.
Yep. So issues with lead, mainly in young children, can cause some developmental issues if you are exposed to lead. So that's why the updates to the lead and copper rule revisions have required that all lead service lines and also galvanized service lines that have once been connected to lead fittings are replaced.
Sir, do you have a follow-up on that?
Well, I was just saying, it doesn't only affect young children. It affects older people as well, because lead basically kills brain cells. And anything connected to brain cells, such as nerves or whatever. So long-term lead exposure, even at our age, can be hazardous to your brain function. So.
Yep,
yeah,
that, absolutely, absolutely.
So one of the higher priorities that is the replacement of the lead service lines, that which, if one of you would explain how old they are and the amount of them, if we could talk a little bit about that, and
Sure.
then keep going, because we set this meeting tonight not on a Tuesday, on a Thursday, so we could spend plenty of time having a good dialogue and answering a lot of questions. So I'm sorry, if you would
Sure.
continue on that.
Yeah, ever since the issue in Michigan with the lead, that's been a big high priority for the federal government, and they finally came through with the regulations for everybody, every state, to get rid of lead lines, solder, galvanized. Like I said, if a galvanized pipe is attached to an area that has lead, the galvanized will hold onto the lead and it'll peel the lead off. And so both of those are considered lead contaminant. What we look for typically is houses older than 1980, early 80s, because those houses typically had some type of lead in them. In the fittings, it's not in the main, it's in the services. So they used it for the small diameter pipes, they used it for the solder. So that's what's regulated, is the actual services from the main to the houses. So what we do as far as the lead service line inventory is we go through all the records that the village would have, and we start off with, okay, what areas are older than 1980? And then those become automatic lead suspect. And then any other known things, like when you had the meter replacement, if anything was documented during the meter replacement of what that material was on each side, or a picture, some way to identify, actually have eyes on it, we can identify what those connections are, and we can rule them as lead or not lead. The way the government looks at it is, if it's not specifically non-lead, plastic, copper, then it is ruled either an unknown or lead. An unknown is considered lead until it's proven otherwise. So when we look through the inventory of everybody, we go through all the different parameters that we know about the system. And then we apply, these houses are either lead or unknown. And then you have to go in there, dig them up, and inspect them. If they are known to have lead, then they have to be replaced from the main all the way into the house. And that's usually 18 inches into the house or to the first shutoff, whichever one's shorter. So that is at no cost. By regulatory, typically we do not replace private side, but because of the lead and copper rule, they say you go into the house. If a homeowner says you're not coming into the house, then the village would have to document that and say, hey, we tried, the person just doesn't want us in there. That's it, then it's on you. Everything inside the house is on the homeowner. But as far as the lead and copper rule, it is into the house, 18 inches or to the first shutoff.
Could I ask that you clarify a little more on galvanized lines?
Sure. A lot of older lines were galvanized, and it's just that mix of lead and galvanized that causes an issue. That galvanized can hold onto the lead or peel that lead off. It's dissimilar metals, so it causes a reaction, causes issues. So that's not with copper and it's not with plastic. It's always galvanized.
Right, thank you.
I think maybe the question that, like, the answer that you're looking for, correct me if I'm wrong, is he wants to know, like, what we're gonna do to make the filtration system. So we're saying here on this capital improvement, like, yes, we're gonna do something with the water treatment upgrades. I think they wanna know specifically, like, how we're gonna do that, which probably wouldn't be answered until the engineering process. But I think that's the answer that we're looking for that.
So in those first couple of years, when you've seen the studies and the reports, that's those years, when you're doing the design and you're doing the evaluations. So you'd have to go in there, evaluate what's coming in there, what needs to be filtered, how much needs to be filtered, the flow, everything. And then during that process, you would basically design what filtration would be most effective for the contaminants that you find, or the materials that you find, and what volumes, what sizes. So it would be in that evaluation and report phase.
Thank you.
Would you expect that filtration would be implemented in the first 5 years?
That was in the,
Yes.
yeah, that would be one of the first evaluations,
So
would
it
be
would be implemented within 5 years?
if you got funding. I mean, that's the whole point of it, is to identify it, identify exactly what you need, price it, and then fund it.
Okay. And there's a lot of chatter within the EPA regarding PFAS, or
Mm-hmm.
fluoride chemicals. Would we also at that point filter for those as well?
Right now, it's not regulated. It's on a monitoring, but we definitely look at it and see what would it take. So prepare for
Good
it.
question, Trustee Weisberg. I don't think I've heard that question
Oh,
so
it's,
far.
it's big news.
Well, I know it's big news.
Yeah.
It's very big, and it's coming. It's a matter of time.
I'm sure they're going to regulate it at some point, so.
Absolutely.
I get a lot of complaints regarding brown water.
Mhm.
It seems random.
Mhm.
I don't really get all that much brown water at my residence, but I know citizens who get it quite often. How would we mitigate that, say, within 5 years?
All right.
Is that possible? Because one of my concerns is if we raise rates and people are still getting brown water.
Yeah.
That's going to be a hard sell, because no one wants brown water just coming out of their taps.
Right.
I know from the EPA perspective that the water is safe, but if it's brown, no one wants to hear that it's safe. They want it
Right.
clear. So any suggestions or recommendations regarding the brown water?
Brown water's tricky because it can be anywhere in your system. Usually it's an accumulation of materials that's coming through the pipe. It's microfine, and just over years and years and years, it builds up. It's not a contaminant, it's not deemed harmful, but it is unpleasant. A lot of different things can cause that to break off and show up in your system. Those inside of the pipes, the best way to do it is to scour them out or replace them. And there's multiple ways to do that. A flushing program can get rid of some of that, where you get that pressure up and really push it through. I mean, think about anything when you're trying to blow out a pipe. The more pressure, more water you can get through there, the more you're going to blow out. So a good flushing program, and what I say is a reverse flushing program. So if you have water going one direction and a pipe feeding your system, the brown materials, whatever you want to call it, tend to accumulate in that direction. If you reverse the flow, it breaks off, and then it shows up in your system. So a change in feed to your system I know it sounds weird to reverse flow of water, but typically water flows one way through a pipe, unless you have a break or you have a high use in one area where it'll force it a different direction. And that's typically where you get your brown water, is that breaking off. You can do that by flushing in multiple directions on a regular basis. That'll get a lot of it. We talked about ice pigging, or ice pigging is they basically bring a big truck, like a semi-truck full of ice water. They freeze it down to a point where it's a slush. I mean, think about in the winter, when you have the salt on the roads mixing with everything, it turns into the slush on the side of the road. They take that slush, put it into like a fire hydrant, pump it down the road to the next fire hydrant, and that ice itself scours the inside of the pipe. And it breaks off a lot of that stuff. Might not break it all, but it does a really good job at it. And it just flushes it out the hydrant. The good part is it's salt water, it's not harmful. There's no use, no problems with it. The ice melts, it goes on down the road. It's not a problem. So it's a good way to flush your system and clean your pipes. The other way is really identifying older areas that may have the buildup in the pipes and replacing them.
Mary, I know you had your hand up back there, and this is a good group. I appreciate everybody listening. If you got questions, just fire them off to these gentlemen. Go ahead, Mary.
Well, Brandon, hit on what I was going to ask about with the brown water. I think that's the biggest concern with most of the residents, because that's what they can see. And I understand there has to be studies done, but even in the 5 years, you can't guarantee, even in the next, say, 2 to 3 years, we're still going to have the brown water problem because of the old age of the lines. And unfortunately, the last 6 months, we've had about, 3 or 4 working house fires. And when that happens, you're using a higher volume of water, so that tends to stir up.
Yep.
But a lot of people don't understand that also. And they don't, so I'm asking, and like Brandon said, is there any in the near future help with the groundwater? Even though I understand what you're saying about being okay, you don't like to give
Yeah.
your kids a bath in it, you don't
No.
want to drink it. But if you want to raise my rates, I understand where you gotta have money to fix stuff, but you also
Yep.
gotta understand, that's.
Yeah, I completely understand. It is a long-term program. It's not a one-night fix. How many miles of water mains do you have in the village?
Almost 40.
So 40 miles? It's a lot of pipe. Not all of those are going to have that issue, but the older ones certainly will. So it's a long-term plan to fix it. It's not going to be overnight.
So some of these, I was looking at some of the funding here as far as the rates and forecasting what we'll need to charge to address some of these concerns. And in here, I was just wondering, based on your calculations, and I think we may have talked about this when we had a discussion on it, but in this environment we have right now with higher interest rates and interest rates continuing to increase, some of the rates that you are forecasting are 3.5% loan rates, SRF funding at 2.5%, 49% principal forgiveness, 50% of grants. Let's say we're being pessimistic, and that nothing of that comes to pass, interest rates remain high. What would we be looking at in terms of having to have funding to do all these projects? I mean, it could be exponentially higher. Is that correct?
It could be. I mean, that's always the chance. I will say right now, SRF funding for lead service lines is 1.24.
Okay.
And if you don't get any grant taken off, no loan forgiveness, that interest rate drops to 1.04. They give you a credit on your interest if you don't qualify for loan forgiveness. So
Totally, or at 100% or at?
if you have to pay 100%, you get zero of that 49% grant.
Right.
They knock down the interest rate to help out. So that drops and that's right now. That changes, I think, in July. But I mean, you're looking at the current rates right now. If you go buy a car, it's 8%. SRF at 1.24. You're not going to get that anywhere else. And they do have a lot of money coming down from the federal government, from what I hear, with all the new bills going on for the lead service and also manganese, PFAS. They're starting to throw a lot of money at it because they know these systems throughout, and this is across the country. Every community is dealing with this exact same thing. They know that all these communities can afford it. So it's coming down in some grant, some loan forgiveness, low interest. It's a crapshoot. You don't know what's going to happen in July. But to know that right now it's 1.24, I wouldn't think it would jump to 5 or 6.
And are we seeing that? I mean, we talked about mains, water mains dating back to before my great-grandma was born. Are you seeing, based on your experience, other locations, other municipalities you've serviced, are they getting grants or favorable rates for replacing that kind of infrastructure?
Yeah, SRF does those infrastructure loans too.
Good question, trustee. So would you please tell us some other communities you're working with, why we should listen to you? I don't think I think the board knows that
Yeah.
for public consumption.
Yeah, Carlinville, Illinois, Hillsborough, Illinois, we're working with both of them. Some of our clients have the higher rates and they don't go to SRF funding. They're big enough that they don't need it and they don't qualify. A lot of them are small communities that apply for SRF because that's who they serve, is the smaller communities. We're nationwide. Our company is from California to Maine, so we have a really big presence out east. They are really strict with their water, so a lot of our really high technical people are from out east, and we use them as our resources to do all our designs around here.
Your assumptions, though, on the financials are based on revenue streams solely from the water company, correct?
Ethan did that, but yeah, I think so.
Well, and my point is that the village has had surpluses the last 4 years. We just had $1 million surplus. There's nothing that would prohibit the village from using other revenue streams to help pay for this, not just put the burden solely on the water company.
The other thing, I think we included some estimates for like road projects like Prospect Road, hopefully Route 29, to replace those water mains with the road project. And then if we're fortunate to get grants, the big grant for the road project, include the infrastructure with that grant. So it wouldn't come directly from the water fund, but through that project grant funding.
So Wayne, in your opinion, does that change or lower the cost if we take advantage of when construction on Route 29 and Prospect are occurring? Does that lower the cost?
It would in the long run, certainly. So that's, again, the scheme for a road project is to do the infrastructure ahead of the road, because you save everybody money and grief and everything else. You know, you don't want to rip the road up after it's a new road to replace a water main or a sewer or something like that.
And they've thank you for the presentation, done a really good job, but is it correct then, say Prospect Road, for instance, they're assuming that the village is going to pay the full cost of replacing, say, the mains on Prospect Road, but would some of those water main replacements be eligible for some of the federal funding
Yes, I mean, from what we're seeing now for the road project, and we included like 50%, I think.
Some of the ones that were a really typical grant forgiveness, we've included that as a grant forgiveness with the assumption that.
And you're finding, okay.
But I mean, typically,
yeah, go ahead.
the grants that we're seeing now from the feds, the big grants for road projects, and they include other infrastructure. So they understand the needs, the overall needs of the communities. In a project like Route 29, where it's a state road, that's typically a municipal cost. So we would try to get grants through SRF, or I don't know if many of you know, we applied for the congressional appropriations for that funding for Route 29 as well. And it still is cycled through the SRF program. So I guess I would add the SRF program, we talked about that a little bit the other night, is great program. Most of the funding opportunities are going to come through that. For a village the size of Peoria Heights and the demographics of Peoria Heights, we really have a better opportunity to get some of that funding and some of that principal forgiveness.
Yeah, one thing that's important is the thing that they look at is the size of the community and the median household income. So when they see a disadvantaged community that doesn't have a high, income rate, then they tend to get more grant. Mm-hmm. And then another thing with the SRF is even if you get a little grant this year with the loan, so say it's 20%, just throwing it out there. So you're going to pay 80% loan, 20% grant forgiveness. The next year, if IEPA has money left over for the year, they have that option to distribute it to people that took out loans previously, because they have to get rid of that money by the end of their fiscal year in order to get new money. The SRF program's a little different than a lot of them. They want a zero balance at the end of the year, get all new money the next year. So if they have a leftover from a year that didn't get distributed, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll offer additional loan forgiveness to people that already have a loan. So maybe you only got 20 up front, but maybe there was some extra money the next year and they give you another 5 or 10, and they could do that any year. It's not guaranteed. You don't know. It's at the mercy of whatever's left over from the previous year or from that year.
I saw at least a couple of hands go up out there, so if you take the questions.
Yeah, sure.
I know that you had mentioned before some of the water mains at Marcus from 1914. Do we actually have a real chart with, okay, this subdivision, the water mains were put in this particular year, and then this next section they were put in a concurrent or a following time frame?
Yes.
So that we can actually figure this out.
Yeah.
Where we got to start at, and where we got to finish at.
Good question. I'm going to let Trustee Goff, and most of you probably know Mark, but he spent a career working for Peoria Heights Water Works and knows a lot about the history. So Trustee Goff, take a
Yeah, there is the GIS maps that have been done for Peoria Heights. A lot of effort was put into identifying the ages of the water mains in each area. Now, of course, when the construction was done, some subdivisions hadn't been built yet, and some were added later. So, you can have a main that's installed in 1914 that's supplying water through mains that were installed in 1935 that supply water to mains that were installed in 1972. So, but we tried to identify each of those to the best of our ability.
And also, I understand through Chris Chandler that you've identified the lead service lines, or you're in the process of doing that.
Yeah, we are in the process of that, yeah.
Did you have a question? Go right ahead.
I had a question, you kind of spoke to it, I think, Trustee Woody did identify. It sounds like there's a lot of opportunity to get good funding from the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Are there risks in applying for that each year, and are there limitations to receiving those?
No. I mean, not that I know of. I'm not one of our, we have a whole funding team that takes care of all that stuff. I do my best on it. But I don't think it's limited like that. I mean, as long as your financials show that you can pay a loan, I mean, that's what it goes off of. You know, they look at where you're at, and that's one of the reasons of the rates, to show that you're fiscally responsible to pay back that loan. And that's the most important thing. As long as they know that you can pay it back and you can prove, hey, we're charging the rates that we need to pay these loans, I think you qualify.
I have a question that would step back just a little bit. We were talking about a project like Prospect Road, and we're applying for grants. As part of the application process, do the authors of those grants consider for instance, the age and condition of the water main or the underground utilities as when they're deciding whether they're going to give us or somebody else that grant?
They do, and again, the grants we're seeing now include infrastructure. So when we apply for grants, like we did for the grant we got, which was an appropriation, but we specifically say that in the application as well. And the grants that I've seen recently include that in the grant, infrastructure improvements, roadway improvements, things like that. So
good.
And it's more free than it was 10 years ago.
Right.
With these dollars, because again, the federal and state authorities understand the need in these communities and want to include everything with those grants.
Good. Hey, thank you.
Who else?
Yeah, one of the things I want to just kind of restate that Zach talked about earlier, you know, this is a living document. Every year, you need to reevaluate it, see if any of your priorities have changed, evaluate what money you got. Maybe you got a little extra grant, so maybe you can do a little bit more next year. Maybe you didn't get as much as you want, so maybe you can do a little less. That should be reevaluated every year and see what you can do for that year, what you can get, what you can apply for. Funding changes every year. We've seen it in the last few years. We have funding out there today. Pre-COVID was not there. So it can change really fast one way or another, either more or less. So it's just really important to keep revisiting this, revisiting your capital improvement plan and your rates. Those rates are not set in stone. It's a guide. You got to see where you're at each year and adjust accordingly wherever you need to.
I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. This is probably one of the most important topics around this horseshoe that we have. We want to supply good, clean, safe drinking water. This is just the first step, so getting the information and getting the recommendations, I would ask you to please ask your family, your neighbors, your friends to watch the video then. We're looking for public input. That's the whole reason for the meeting. The public paid for this study. It's tax money that paid for it, and it's your water system. We want your comments. There's a whole list, as you heard, of recommendations. We need to prioritize those. What are the next steps? What are the most serious? You know, obviously, I would tend to agree that brown water, even though it's may not be unsafe, we certainly want to get that addressed as soon as possible. I think lead, obviously, too. Gentleman in the back mentioned that to me is a very high priority issue, as is the manganese. So from here on, I think we need to continue this conversation, give direction to Mr. Aldridge about the next steps. And again, I said it earlier, I don't think that we can solve this problem and put it on the back of the water company and just use that revenue and expect the company, and this, I mean, we've lost a lot of customers. The Villages has some population loss. The system in part was built on a high demand from Pabst Brewing, which is no longer in existence. So there's some unusual aspects of all of this, but I think we should be looking at all revenue streams, and I would encourage you to consider using all or part of the $1 million surplus to put in capital improvements. So I'm done, and I'm going to go to you, Trustee Weisberg. I think Trustee Goff wanted to say something.
On the financials, on our water bill, we have an INF fee that finances past loans and also infrastructure needs. When we pass these new rates, does that INF fee go away? Because if we were raising rates to fund infrastructure, why would we need a separate INF fee?
But let me say that these are recommendations. The board will set the rates, and what I just said, I don't think these costs should just be borne by the users and the water company. I think the village, in other ways, should be helping out. But Wayne, can you answer that question?
I don't believe the INF fee would go away for what it's, but it could. I mean, it's a board discretion.
I would caution the board that the loan that it is currently financing is based off of water revenues, but those revenues were specifically dedicated to the loan. We would need to look into that loan agreement specifically before considering that.
Okay. I just have concerns if we say we're raising everyone's bills 10% for infrastructure needs, but we also have an infrastructure fee. I know that question's going to come up.
I think it's on the chart from the financials, because I feel like I asked in my meeting that those rates included there's a little blurb and it says includes the INF right there.
Yeah, it includes INF fees.
So that, like, where that is, that's included in.
So that's going to go away, the 10% is going to.
I don't know that we can say it that way. I don't think it's going to go away, but what they're projecting is that what their projection, that's with the INF and what the rate would be raised. I think the INF would still be listed that way because of how we have to pay it, but the rate that they're saying here, that's built into that rate that they're telling us. Is that clear?
No, it's clear. But the INF fee doesn't just cover the loan. It also covers.
There's approximately $40,000 a year that is undedicated right now. That has been building up over several years. The current balance is going to be used to pay for the water main replacement on Lake Avenue. What I would suggest, Trustee Weisenberg, is you might consider if the board does increase rates, that perhaps they do so under the INF fee in order to better designate and keep track of, because we do track those separately, and that is a list that I keep track of. So when residents ask what infrastructure has been improved by the INF, we have that list ready and able to provide them with clear transparency on what is this being used for.
Okay.
So I know this meeting is going to generate a whole lot more questions. I think the questions have been good, but now next steps is what we need to be looking at. Mr. Aldridge, you're looking at me.
I just, next step certainly is some direction on rates and things like that. I think that's the next obvious step. The other things, just to recall for the public and folks that are here, that we did approve a grant for the lead service line inventory the other night, so that's a good first step and a positive step, getting the lead service lines completely inventoried in the village, as well as the SRF loan program for lead service lines. So if applying for a loan for that, so I think those are good positive steps on getting that major component, lead service lines, taken care of. If the board does approve a funding plan for this, and hopefully that's done sooner than later, but we would certainly get started on selecting consultants, whether it's Woodard & Kern or another firm, to help us out with some of these major components of the capital plan, including the filtration process. And I think that's probably our next very high priority. In the meantime, it sounds like we may want to invest more in ice pigging or other methods to flush the lines and identify, where we have issues with the brown water. And I would also encourage the public, if you notice this, notice an issue with brown water, call the water department and so we can identify it and put it on a map. That's an important thing for us to do so we can, localize these areas where there's issues. That's important if there's water main breaks and everything, so put it on the map so we know where the issues are and we can identify and prioritize those areas.
As I would say too, sorry, as the gentleman referred to earlier, I'll go into that a little bit about, as far as the brown water. I get brown water, I understand. It's not something we want, but when, as Mr. Aldridge said, if we map this, it helps us because some areas of our system, the water naturally flows one way and then another way in the pipes. When that happens, those pipes tend to be cleaner. When the water, because of the demand, tends to flow one direction all the time in a pipe, as they described, that's when the buildup happens. And then if a break or if a house fire or something is taking place and it draws water the opposite direction, you have the problem of brown water. And if we can begin to identify this and with engineering help, see what the way the water's flowing through our system, identify if we're having brown water because of a break or just simply because the water has changed direction, it'll help us a great deal.
Since we're kind of building this online submission thing right now for ordinances, is there any way to do at the same time an online submission for any water issues as well, so that maybe it would be a little easier for the residents and for us to track where they're coming from? I mean, so the water department is open, during people's working hours. Sometimes they may not have a chance to call, but when they get home at 6:30, if they could submit online, maybe that helps us track it better.
I think that's a great idea. Wayne, can we figure out, I know you don't have an answer tonight, but can we figure that out?
There should be a way. It might, we'll have to look into that. It might involve some expense.
I mean, even if it's just emails to the village,
Yeah.
of when it occurred and what the problem is,
Yeah.
that's at least a start.
Emails would help, any sort of, so we might have to look at the website. There certainly is reporting softwares and things like that, but there might be a simpler solution.
We do have an email link on our webpage for the water department if you have any issues. And I would like to just comment, Don, if I'm correct, one of the first things in this is a hydraulic model of the system, which would help us develop this directional flushing to help clear out the lines, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, we can build a hydraulic model of the entire system, look at that flow, and see the best places to start flushing.
By shutting valves.
You shut valves.
Amounts, and then going back a few months later and shutting them and
Yep,
keeping them going.
we can certainly do that.
Right.
And typically with that, we have the fire department or someone go out there and open very strategic valves to test the pressures. And we can do that. We can tell you which ones to do the pressure test on to know that the pressures are. And then we can look at that whole model, see how it's flowing, and recommend a flushing schedule.
Yeah.
We have one more question back there, then I'm going to go to the clerk. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I was just going to say, as far as any kind of thing like that, a simple web application will take care of anything where you need to submit a report. I have 25 years of computer engineering around the world, so I'm an engineer at heart, but the basic thing is a simple 5-minute application. Yes, I'm having brown water, click here, and it puts a counter on and locates, where you're at in the city.
Thank you, and thanks for being here tonight. Stephanie, you have some news?
So actually on our website, it is right next to the pay water bill button. It's very easy to find on the far right side. It says in the top banner, contact. If you click on that, there's a field you can fill out with your name, email address, subject. This is used for all sorts of complaints, but it's monitored frequently by our administrative staff, and that's rerouted to the correct departments. So we'll review that, I'm sure, with our webmaster to make sure that we can improve that so that we can get these reports in.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Gentlemen, one quick thing, and so just so I know, we're kind of looking at all our options here. So just to address this brown water issue, if we were to turn on some cross valve, hypothetically from another system, that would not solve the problem for brown water, even if we're getting water from another water system. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would not solve it.
Okay.
I mean, you'd be bringing in possibly clear water, but the issue's in your system.
Right.
And since we can't see in the pipes, like they just mentioned, it's great to know where those are, so if you do report it, it does help.
So going with some other thing doesn't solve this problem?
That does not solve, as long as it's going through your pipes, it's not going to solve the problem.
Trustee Goff, often that's in the service lines too, is it not?
Yes, I mean, we find over the years that we've been looking at this and dealing with this, we find that it's not only the mains, it can be in the service line going to the house, it can be in the soft water treatment, it can be in the lines in the house, especially if they're galvanized lines. So you described it as tricky. It's very tricky.
It's very tricky. Typically with a house, if you see low pressures in the house, but the main has high pressure, it's in that service line somewhere. So usually it's easier to detect if it's in there. But you got to know the pressure at the main, and you got to see what the pressure is at the tap.
And I think in our comprehensive plan, they did a study of what age our home stock is. And I think like 90% of it is going to fall prior to 1980. I mean, I'd say 95%. So,
If the village hypothetically had cash in hand and just wanted to me, I could be wrong, but it seems most logical to start at the source. So if we just decided we're going to commit, we're going to filtrate, how long does that take?
To design it and implement it, or to help your system?
For the system to start with filtration that would rectify the manganese and any other filtration issues.
It'll stop the issues from coming into your system, but it doesn't stop the issues that are already in your system.
Yeah, I understand that, but just starting at the source, if we decided to commit to the filtration, that seems to me, is that easier to do, obviously, than digging up a street and replacing a main? How
Yeah.
quickly can that be done?
I'm not sure. Probably 6-month design time, and then you need to go through IEPA permitting for all the new, anytime you change your process, you have to get permits.
can we have one filtration for the entire system, or do we need one filter for every well?
You could do either.
Okay.
What's most cost effective?
I mean, we kind of looked at just the manganese, and doing it just at the plant, it was like $8.5 million, I believe. But if you do it at each well, you're looking at about $1 million. I think 800,000 or $1 million, I don't remember what the...
That's just for one mineral.
That was just for one filtration, and that, I don't even know if that included all the engineering and everything. I think the vessel was 600,000 or 700,000, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Just for the vessel.
But we need to do that at every single well.
You either need to do it at every single well, or one bigger one at the plant.
The highest producing?
Yeah, so not all your wells are producing manganese. So kind of one of the ways we looked at it was breaking it up per well and doing your worst well first.
Yeah.
Because it gives you a lower upfront capital cost, because we didn't want to hit you with $8 million right off the bat. That's a big hit, where you can take $1 million each year, but doing $8 million up front, it's a big hit and it's sticker shock. But all of your wells don't have a manganese problem. So you're under that thing. If you have 3 out of 5 that have manganese, do you want to do it at the treatment plant for $8 million, or do you want to do just 3 at the wells that are producing manganese? And if the other ones start producing manganese, you could add on. But like I said, you're blending now and getting you down below your limits. So if you hit your worst ones first, you're really bringing it down.
But to Trustee Weisenberg's point, that's just addressing manganese. It's not
That is.
addressing other things that are in the water.
Right, and that would be part of the study, is addressing the other things. The filtration might be a little easier, just do it at the plant, because it's coming from all the wells.
I think that raises a good point, though, that the board needs to consider. You have water quality, but you also have issues that affect public health. So it's a little of both. They're both important, but I would think we'd want to lean on the side of public health first.
Would you have an estimate of a not just manganese, but a filtration plant that would take care of PFAS, future-proofed for it.
There's a lot that goes into
Right.
all that calculations and costs, so, yeah, I couldn't give you that cost today.
That was gonna be my comment, is big picture, look at things, and that starts with a good engineering study.
That's right, and that's why that's up front, is to really dive into it and see what is the best result. Because you don't, until you really look at it and really hammer down the numbers, you don't know what direction is best until you do the study and the engineering. And then you can decide which way you want to go.
So really, that would be our next major step, right? Is we need
Yes.
to move,
Yeah.
we need to get moving on that.
Yes.
So I'm sorry to go on, but can you comment on the quality of the water which comes from the aquifer? We know there's some manganese seeping in, but what's your opinion of the general quality of our aquifer, that water?
That I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, there's no analysis that was done on that as part of this project. That would be part of the preliminary engineering evaluation to analyze the quality of the water in that aquifer, as well as treatment alternatives to remove manganese or any other future contaminants that may be present.
Are most of the communities you work with, are they using surface water, river water, or the aquifers?
everything.
Everything?
We have customers that use, shallow wells to deep wells, surface water, it's everything. Some of them have to deal with radionuclides. Surface water has its own issues. All of them have their own issues.
The challenge is varied depending on what source you're using, is that?
Absolutely. The treatment is different, filtration is different, everything is different per type of water you're getting.
I will say that our aquifer, our wells are 400 feet from Illinois American's well field. We're drawing from the same quality of water as Illinois
Right.
American.
And that's why I said,
They filter their wells, though?
What's that?
They filter their.
They
water, okay.
absolutely have a filtration system,
Yeah.
yes.
They use river as a source of water.
Yeah, they also use river water as well.
So from what I know of the system in this area is this area has good water quantity as opposed to, say, over in the Bloomington Normal area where Bloomington pulls out of lakes and they have issues. And so you really want to pull out of some of these aquifers in the Peoria area as far as quantity has good water source.
Another curveball question, Mr. Aldridge. So, we read about it and hear in the media the shortage of water coming in the future. Do we have enough water? Would it ever be possible for us to sell additional water supply?
Well, that's my opinion from what I know of the geography of the area. I think we've got a good source of water. And then there's also the river, if ever,
But would there ever be an opportunity in market to sell any of our excess water to any other community? That
Who knows? It could be in the far future, yes. It just, when we talk about that, you have to get the water to where it needs to be and things like that, so that's the big expense. You want it to be as locally sourced as possible.
Anyone else in the audience? Yes, sir, go ahead.
My only comment on that is, if we talk about future planning, capacity, sales, or anything like that, then we better, pardon the expression, damn well get our ducks in a row as far as filtration goes and delivery before we even consider that, because we can wind up in a situation where now these costs jump up tenfold just because we need to push more volume of water to our sort of customers, other local municipalities. So I think it's important that we, at least first step, get this situation under control so that we can guarantee 100% that we will not have future water issues.
Yeah, we're spending a lot of money. We want to get it right, and thank you all for being here. And this is ongoing, so please return and send us your thoughts. Anyone else? Any other going once?
Mayor, if I may, just would like to certainly thank Don and Zach for being here this evening and the good work of all the Woodard and Curran team.
Both you and your company.
support work being done behind the scenes too, so, and in particular, your work on some of the grants, Woodard and Kern helped us with the applications for
With the
the
IEP.
service line, inventory grant, and the other SRF loan program, so thanks for that
Good,
as well.
thank you so much. Trustee Gett,
I make a motion to adjourn.
is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We're adjourned.